You could almost hear the lie before he even opened his mouth. District Attorney Charles Whitford had that look again, the one that meant the truth was about to be stripped, rewritten, and weaponized against someone who didn't deserve it. Dr. Maya Ellison sat rigid at the defense table, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles ached. She wasn't used to being in court. Her world was operating rooms, clean surgical gloves, and the smell of antiseptic. Not this place. Not the suffocating air thick with the scent of old wood, polished brass, and silent judgment. She had saved lives, children's lives, strangers, people who had looked her in the eyes with tears of gratitude. But now, she was the one staring down a man who saw her not as a doctor, not as a citizen, but as a target, a problem to be eliminated, a black woman who dared to stand where he thought she didn't belong. Whitford rose from his seat, his perfectly tailored suit barely creasing as he addressed the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about negligence. Gross negligence. A woman who, through recklessness, cost a patient his life. Maya's stomach twisted. That wasn't just a lie. It was an erasure. Her lawyer, Samuel Ortiz, a wiry man with the posture of someone constantly bracing for impact, leaned toward her. "Don't react," he murmured. "No matter what he says. But how do you stay still when someone is chiseling away at your soul in public?" Whitford kept talking, his voice dripping with the false gravity of a man convinced his prejudice was patriotism. "You'll hear about her so-called accomplishments, about her service to the community. But the facts, the cold, hard facts will show you that Dr. Ellison made a fatal mistake, and worse, she tried to cover it up." Maya's eyes darted to the gallery, and there halfway down the row she saw him. General Thomas Green, retired, Medal of Honor. The kind of man who could walk into a room and make everyone unconsciously sit up straighter. His uniform wasn't military today, but his presence was. Broad-shouldered, steel-eyed, and radiating an authority that didn't need announcing. He gave her the smallest nod. She had never met him before, but she had read his story, the man who had led soldiers through fire and refused to leave anyone behind, no matter their race, rank, or politics. And for reasons she didn't yet understand, he was here, watching. Whitford was wrapping up his opening statement, his voice swelling with manufactured righteousness. "At the end of this trial, you will see that justice demands only one verdict: guilty." The judge, an older woman with a gavel that seemed heavier than it should be, turned to the defense. "Mr. Ortiz, you may proceed." Samuel rose, adjusted his tie, and gave a slight smile to the jury, the kind that said, "I know you're being fed a story, but wait until you hear the truth." "This case," he began, "is not about negligence. It's about a smear campaign. It's about power. And it's about what happens when the truth gets in the way of someone's ambitions." The jurors shifted. Someone coughed in the gallery, and Maya could feel the heat of Whitford's glare burning into her from across the aisle. Maya's ordeal had started 6 months ago, on a rainy night at St. Gabriel's Hospital. A patient had come in, gunshot wound to the abdomen, massive blood loss. She had worked for hours, her team moving with precision, until the man's heart gave out. It was tragic, but not unusual in trauma care. Not everyone can be saved. But this patient had been the son of a wealthy developer, a man with political ties, the kind of man who played golf with Whitford on Sundays. And suddenly, an investigation had appeared out of nowhere. Anonymous complaints about Maya's conduct surfaced. Charts were subpoenaed. Her decisions were dissected by people who had never set foot in an ER. Now she was here, her career and freedom dangling over the abyss. General Green leaned forward, elbows on his knees, studying Whitford the way a tactician studies an enemy commander. He wasn't in the chain of events yet, but something about the way Whitford smirked, the way the gallery shifted uneasily, told him that this was not just another trial. This was an ambush. And Green had spent a lifetime countering ambushes. The prosecution called their first witness, Nurse Linda Myers, one of Maya's colleagues. "Ms. Myers," Whitford said smoothly, "you were on duty the night Mr. Preston was brought in?" "Yes." "And you witnessed Dr. Ellison's decisions during surgery?" "Yes." "Would you say those decisions contributed to Mr. Preston's death?" Maya's heart clenched. Linda had been her friend. They'd eaten lunch together, shared gallows humor over bad coffee. Linda hesitated. I can't say for sure. But you had concerns?" Whitford pressed. She glanced at Maya. "Yes." The words hit like a slap. Samuel was on his feet. Objection, Your Honor, speculation. Sustained. The judge said, but the damage was done. The jurors had heard it. Whitford smiled faintly. He had planted the seed. Green's fingers tapped against his knee. He could see the pattern now. Whitford wasn't just prosecuting a case. He was running a campaign. Every word, every pause, calculated to make Maya look incompetent at best, dangerous at worst. And Green knew something Whitford didn't. The truth about that night. Because the man who had brought Preston to the hospital, the one who had carried him out of a back alley under gunfire, had been a soldier in Green's unit years ago. A soldier who had called Green 2 days later, saying, "Sir, they're trying to frame the doc who tried to save him." Green had come to court to watch. But now, he knew he wouldn't just be watching. Maya kept her eyes forward, jaw locked. She wanted to turn and look at Linda, to ask her why, but she knew that would only give Whitford more ammunition. Samuel adjusted his papers with deliberate slowness. "No further questions," he said, his voice even. Whitford called the next witness Dr. Barry Kessler, the hospital's chief of surgery. Tall, thin, and perpetually looking as if he had just smelled something unpleasant, Kessler strode to the stand. Under oath, his words cut deeper than any scalpel. Dr. Ellison was talented, but reckless. I warned her about taking unnecessary risks. Samuel leaned forward. "Doctor, isn't it true that trauma surgery is inherently risky?" Kessler sniffed. "There's risk, and then there's poor judgment. On the night in question, she made a decision that—" "Objection," Samuel barked. The judge looked over her glasses. "Overruled. Proceed." Maya's stomach dropped. She could feel Whitford's strategy playing out like a rigged chess game. 2 pawns down, her defenses crumbling. From the gallery, Green could see the invisible lines of attack forming. Whitford was exploiting every angle: old grudges in the hospital, professional jealousy, the patient's political connections. This wasn't a prosecution. It was an execution with legal paperwork. And Green had seen this kind of thing before, not in a courtroom, but in war zones, where enemies used propaganda as their sharpest weapon. If you could control the story, you could control the outcome. The lunch recess came like a gasp of air after being held underwater too long. Maya followed Samuel into the small, fluorescent-lit conference room behind the courtroom. "Barry's in on it," she said as soon as the door closed. "He's been trying to get me out for years." Samuel rubbed his temples. "Yeah, I know. But knowing it and proving it are 2 different things. Then we need to prove it." He gave her a look that weary, "This isn't TV drama look. We're not exactly swimming in resources here. Whitford's got political muscle, half the hospital brass, and a media machine waiting to crucify you the second he gets a soundbite. We've got," he gestured vaguely, "me." Maya slumped into the chair. "And the truth. Doesn't that count for anything?" Samuel's pause was answer enough. When they returned, Green's eyes tracked Maya's every movement. He saw the exhaustion in her posture, the way she carried the weight of every accusation. And something in him, something that had been drilled into his bones from years of service, clicked into place. No one fights alone. That afternoon, Whitford brought in a surprise witness, Detective Alan Wicks, lead investigator on the case. He wore his badge like a shield, his voice steady as he recounted evidence that painted Maya as negligent: altered charts, missing timestamps, ambiguous notes. Samuel cross-examined, but the damage was mounting. By the time court adjourned for the day, Maya felt hollow. She stepped out into the crisp air, the courthouse steps stretching before her like a gauntlet. Reporters clustered at the base, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. "Dr. Ellison, did you falsify medical records? Do you have any comment on the accusations from your colleagues?" She kept her head down. The questions snapped at her heels like angry dogs. And then, a shadow fell beside her. "Ma'am." She turned to see Green, his expression calm but unyielding. Up close, he was even more imposing, not because of his size, but because of the way he carried himself. Every movement precise, every word deliberate. "I'm Thomas Green," he said. "We need to talk." They sat in a quiet cafe 3 blocks away. Green didn't waste time. "I know what happened the night Preston died," he said. "Or at least, I know what didn't happen. You didn't kill him." Maya's breath caught. "How could you possibly?" "The man who brought him in was Sergeant Devin Marks. Served under me in Kandahar. He called me 2 days later. Said you fought like hell to save him. Said you were the only reason Preston even made it to the operating table alive. Maya blinked, stunned. Then why didn't he testify? Green's jaw tightened. Because someone got to him first. And from what I hear, they made it clear that if he spoke up, his family would pay for it. A cold wave swept through her. You're saying they threatened him? I'm saying this is bigger than you think. And I don't let my people go down without a fight. Back at his apartment that night, Green dug through old contacts, calling in favors from people who still owed him their lives. Military buddies, investigative journalists, even a couple of retired intelligence officers. If Whitford wanted a war of narratives, Green was going to give him one. By midnight, he had a partial picture. Preston's father, Leonard Preston Sr., was not just a wealthy developer, he was also a major donor to Whitford's political campaigns. The hospital board had been quietly pressuring Maya for months after she blew the whistle on budget mismanagement in the trauma department. And Detective Wicks had a history of botched investigations that mysteriously disappeared from public record. It wasn't proof yet, but it was a trail. The next morning in court, Green sat in the same spot in the gallery. This time, when Whitford began his questioning, Green wasn't just watching, he was noting every slip, every inconsistent statement, every time Whitford led a witness too far. Halfway through the day, Samuel caught Green's eye. There was a flicker of recognition there, not as a friend, but as an ally. During a recess, Samuel cornered him in the hallway. You're not just here to spectate, are you? No, Green said. And you're going to need me. Samuel hesitated, studying him. You military? Retired general. Samuel gave a small, humorless laugh. Figures. You've got that I don't bluff look. Green leaned in. I can get you a witness who'll blow this whole thing open. But we have to move fast, before Whitford ties the noose any tighter. Samuel's eyes narrowed. Who? Sergeant Devin Marks. That night, Green found Marks in a dingy motel outside the city. The man looked older than his years, his eyes darting to the door every few seconds. They said they'd hurt my wife, Marks whispered. Said they'd take my kids away. I can't. Green placed a steady hand on his shoulder. You served under me. You know I don't abandon my own. You testify. I'll make sure no one lays a hand on your family. Marks swallowed hard. You don't know these people. I've faced worse, Green said simply. And I've never lost. By the time court reconvened 2 days later, the prosecution was confident. Whitford's smirk was practically permanent. Until Samuel stood and said, Your Honor, the defense calls Sergeant Devin Marks. The room rippled with surprise. Whitford's jaw tightened for the first time. Marks walked to the stand, every step looking like it cost him more than he could afford. But when he raised his right hand and swore to tell the truth, his voice was steady. And then he told them about the alley, the blood, the way Maya's hands never stopped moving, the hours she fought to keep Preston alive. When Whitford tried to shake him, Marks didn't falter. No, sir. She didn't kill him. She gave him a chance. Without her, he'd have been dead before we hit the yard doors. From the gallery, Green watched the cracks form in Whitford's facade. This wasn't over, not by a long shot, but for the first time since the trial began, the tide had shifted. And Green knew exactly where to push next. Whitford's pen tapped against the lectern, each click sharp enough to cut glass. Sergeant Marks, he said, you claim Dr. Ellison did everything in her power to save Mr. Preston's life? Yes, sir. Whitford's eyes narrowed. And yet, the patient died. That is undisputed. That's correct, Marks said evenly. But he died because his injuries were too severe, not because of her actions. Whitford stepped closer, his voice hardening. Or perhaps because of her mistakes. You're not a doctor, Sergeant. You can't tell this jury whether a medical procedure was appropriate, can you? No, sir. But I can tell you I've seen good men die. And I've seen heroes try to stop it. She was one of the heroes. A murmur swept through the courtroom. Whitford's lips tightened. He flicked his gaze toward Leonard Preston Sr., seated in the gallery. The older man's face was a stone mask, but his eyes burned with the kind of rage that comes from losing a son and from needing someone to blame. Nothing further, Whitford said, retreating to his table. During the recess, Whitford cornered Kessler near the courthouse elevator. You told me Marks wouldn't testify, he hissed. Kessler's face blanched. I didn't think he would. Well, he did. And if the defense gets momentum, we lose control of the narrative. Do you understand me? Kessler nodded quickly, his Adam's apple bobbing. Whitford leaned in. Then find something. Anything. I don't care if you have to dig through every chart she's ever signed. We need to destroy her credibility before this trial slips away. Green, meanwhile, had been working another angle. In a quiet corner of a parking garage, he met with Lila Vaughn, an investigative journalist with a reputation for making enemies in all the right places. I've got threads, she told him, flipping through a notepad filled with tight, angular handwriting. Preston's father's real estate company has been bankrolling Whitford's campaign for years. And guess who else is tied to him? The hospital's board chair. There's also talk of a construction contract for a new trauma wing worth millions being quietly promised to Preston's company if Maya's out of the picture. Green's jaw set. So she was never the target. She was just in the way. Exactly. And Whitford's the cleaner. The next morning in court, Whitford unveiled a surprise, new evidence. A chart entry from the night of the surgery, supposedly showing Maya had administered an incorrect medication dosage. Samuel objected immediately. Your Honor, this was not disclosed during discovery. Whitford smiled thinly. We only obtained it yesterday, thanks to Dr. Kessler's diligence. The judge frowned but allowed it in, over Samuel's protest. Maya's heart pounded as the document was projected on the courtroom screen. Her name, the date, the dosage circled in red. That's not mine, she whispered to Samuel. I never wrote that. Samuel leaned close. Then it's a forgery. But proving it's a forgery while the jury's staring at it, that's another battle. From the gallery, Green could feel the shift. Whitford had just planted a landmine. Unless it was defused, it would blow up everything they'd gained. That night, Green called in a favor from a cyber forensics expert he'd worked with during a military contract. Within hours, they were digging into the hospital's electronic records system. By 3 a.m., the expert found a log entry showing that the dosage note had been edited 2 weeks after the surgery from an administrative account linked to Dr. Barry Kessler. Green didn't smile, but something cold and certain settled in his chest. They had their breach. The next day, Samuel rose. Your Honor, the defense moves to admit new evidence regarding the authenticity of the prosecution's recent exhibit. Whitford's head snapped up. Objection. They've had less than 24 hours. The judge silenced him with a raised hand. Overruled. Let's see it. The cyber forensics expert testified, explaining in plain language how the chart had been altered after the fact, and exactly whose account had been used. Gasps rippled through the jury box when the name Barry Kessler was read aloud. Whitford's jaw tightened so hard it looked painful. During the lunch break, Green caught Samuel by the arm. He's going to come harder now. You've wounded him. Samuel nodded grimly. Then we need to finish the job before he gets a chance to recover. Sure enough, that afternoon Whitford tried to pivot, painting Maya as difficult to work with and prone to defying protocol. He called 2 more hospital staff members who recited suspiciously similar talking points about her temper and ego. But by now, the jury's faces were different. Less certain, less receptive. The seed of doubt had taken root only this time. It was in Whitford's case. After court, Green met Maya outside. He's losing control. That's when men like him make mistakes. Maya searched his face. You think we can win this? I don't fight battles I don't intend to win. For the first time in weeks, Maya let herself believe him. 2 days later, Green got the call he'd been waiting for. Lila Vaughn had obtained internal hospital emails messages between Kessler, Whitford, and Leonard Preston Sr., discussing the necessity of removing Dr. Ellison to secure funding. One even mentioned the altered chart directly. It was dynamite, and it was admissible. In court, Samuel introduced the emails with the precision of a surgeon making the first incision. Whitford objected, argued, tried to claim privilege, but the judge overruled him again and again. By the time the last email was read aloud, the room was electric. The jury wasn't just looking at Maya differently, they were looking at Whitford like he was the one on trial. That night, Whitford sat alone in his office, the city lights spilling through the blinds. He had underestimated Green. That had been his first mistake. His second had been letting the general get close enough to smell blood. But Whitford wasn't done. Not yet. The next morning, just before court, Samuel found Green waiting in the hallway. You think he's desperate enough to try something stupid? Samuel asked. Green's eyes were hard. He's desperate enough to try anything. Inside the courtroom, Whitford's opening move confirmed it. He called Leonard Preston Sr. to the stand not to testify about the night his son died, but to give an emotional account of his grief, his search for justice, and his belief that no one should be above the law, no matter how noble their profession. It was a play for sympathy, pure and simple. And for a moment, it worked. The room was hushed, the air thick with the raw pain in Preston's voice. But when Samuel cross-examined, the trap sprang. "Mr. Preston," Samuel said softly, "I'm sorry for your loss. I truly am. But you've been in close communication with the district attorney throughout this case, haven't you?" "Yes." "And with Dr. Barry Kessler?" A pause. "Yes." Samuel held up a printed email. "In this message, you wrote that removing Dr. Ellison was non-negotiable for securing the trauma wing contract for your company. Was that about justice for your son, or was it about money?" The gallery erupted in whispers. Whitford objected furiously, but the damage was irreversible. Preston looked like a man caught with both hands in the till. And Green, sitting in the gallery, knew they had just crossed the line from defense to offense. The trial was far from over, but the balance had shifted. Whitford's case was bleeding credibility, and every day that passed brought them closer to the verdict. And Green wasn't about to let up now. The courtroom had shifted in tone. No longer the quiet, obedient theater of Whitford's making. It had become a battlefield, and his control was slipping with every passing hour. From the bench, Judge Harmon kept her gaze sharp, aware that the air inside the room now felt different. The jury leaned forward more often. The gallery whispered more freely. And Green, unmoving in his seat, was a silent center of gravity no one could ignore. Whitford still had weapons left, but he was fighting uphill now, and he knew it. The next morning, Whitford came out swinging. He called a surprise rebuttal witness, Detective Alan Wicks, again. But this time, Wicks' confidence was frayed. Whitford's questions were sharper, almost frantic. "Detective, is it your testimony that you investigated Dr. Ellison thoroughly?" "Yes, sir." "And did you find any evidence of tampering with the patient's medical records before the defense brought forward their so-called expert?" "No, sir." Whitford smirked toward the jury. So this entire theory about altered records could simply be a defense fabrication, couldn't it? Before Wicks could answer, Samuel rose. "Objection, speculation." "Sustained," Judge Harmon said firmly. Whitford tried again, but the rhythm was gone. The jury had heard the objections, the hesitations, the uncertainty. Every overreach was costing him. In the hallway during recess, Whitford intercepted Green. "You think you're clever, General?" Green didn't stop walking. "I think I'm thorough. You've been meddling in my case since the day you showed up. You have no standing here." Green finally turned, his gaze steady. "My standing comes from the truth. And right now, you're standing in its way." Whitford's voice dropped. "You don't know who you're up against." "Yes, I do," Green said. "A man who mistakes his prejudice for justice. And I've beaten your kind before." That afternoon, Samuel called his final witness, Maya herself. The courtroom fell into a heavy silence as she took the stand. She didn't look at Whitford. She didn't look at the jury yet. She looked at the judge, then at the gallery, then down at her hands. When Samuel began, his voice was soft. "Dr. Ellison, can you tell the jury, in your own words, what happened the night Mr. Preston came into your..." Maya's voice was steady. She spoke of the chaos, the blood, the adrenaline, of the team working in sync, of trying every possible intervention, of watching the monitors, knowing they were losing him. "I didn't see him as a politician's son," she said. "I didn't see him as white or black or anything else. I saw him as my patient. And my duty is the same for every patient, to fight for their life until there's nothing left to fight for." When she finally looked at the jury, her eyes didn't plead. They shone with conviction. "I would do it again. Every decision I made that night, I made to give him a chance. And if you're looking for someone to blame, it isn't me." Whitford's cross-examination was colder. "You expect this jury to believe," he said slowly, "that every single colleague who raised concerns is lying?" "I expect them to believe," Maya said, "that not everyone tells the truth when their own interests are at stake." Whitford's jaw twitched. "And you think you're the victim here?" "I think," she said, "that the real victim is justice when it's twisted to serve an agenda." A faint ripple of approval moved through the gallery. Green didn't move, but inside, he knew this was the turning point. The following day, closing arguments began. Whitford's was polished, deliberate, but beneath the veneer, desperation pulsed. He painted Maya as careless, unrepentant, a danger to her patients. He invoked Preston's grief, the sanctity of trust in medicine, the need to send a message. Samuel's was different. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't dramatize. He laid out the facts like a map, connecting each point to show the path the jury had walked from the night of the surgery, to the altered records, to the emails revealing a conspiracy. And then he left them with a final image. When a surgeon goes into the operating room, she doesn't get to choose her patient. She doesn't get to choose the outcome. But she can choose to fight. That's what Dr. Ellison did. And if that's a crime, then we have criminalized compassion. The jury was excused to deliberate. The wait was brutal. Hours passed. The courthouse buzzed with speculation. Whitford paced in the hallway like a caged animal. Maya sat with Samuel, silent. Green stood near the wall, arms folded, scanning every face that passed as though watching for threats. It was nearly sunset when the bailiff returned. "We have a verdict." The courtroom filled quickly, the air electric. Maya's pulse thundered in her ears. The jury filed in. The foreperson stood, holding the slip of paper. Judge Harmon's voice was calm but firm. "On the charge of criminal negligence resulting in death, how do you find?" The foreperson took a breath. "Not guilty." Maya's knees nearly gave way. The judge continued. "On the charge of falsifying medical records?" "Not guilty." The gallery erupted cheers, sobs, applause. Judge Harmon banged her gavel, calling for order, but there was no mistaking the shift. The weight had lifted. Whitford's face was a mask, but his eyes betrayed the fury beneath. He gathered his papers with mechanical precision, ignoring the reporters who shouted questions. Green stepped into his path. "This isn't over for you," he said quietly. "The people you used to serve your ambition, they're going to turn on you. And I'll be there to make sure they do." Whitford didn't answer. He just walked away. Outside, the courthouse steps were bathed in golden light. Maya stood beside Samuel, facing a wall of microphones. "I came here to save lives," she told the press. "I never thought I'd have to fight for my own. But I had help from people who refused to let injustice win. I hope this verdict reminds us all that the truth matters, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." She glanced toward the crowd. Green was there, standing apart, hands clasped behind his back. She caught his eye and mouth. "Thank you." He gave a small nod, then melted into the crowd. Later that night, Green sat alone on a park bench, watching the city lights shimmer on the river. He thought about the men he'd served with, the battles fought in deserts and streets, the lines between right and wrong that were sometimes blurred but never erased. This had been a different kind of battlefield, but the mission was the same. Protect your own, stand against the abuse of power, and leave no one behind. Somewhere behind him, the sound of quiet footsteps approached. Maya's voice came softly. "You could have just watched. You didn't have to get involved." He didn't turn. "I don't work that way." She sat beside him. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The city hummed around them, alive and indifferent. Finally, she said, "I owe you my life." He shook his head. "You owe me nothing. Just make sure you keep fighting for your patients, for the truth. That's how you pay it forward." She smiled faintly. "I can do that." As they sat there, the night air cool and steady, Green thought of something his first commanding officer had once told him. The uniform comes off, but the duty doesn't. He didn't wear the stars anymore, but the mission hadn't changed. And as long as there were people like Whitford out there, he would keep fighting. Because some battles weren't bound by borders or ranks. They were bound by something greater, the belief that justice should never be a privilege. And tonight, at least, justice had won. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.